It's time to talk about the very worst comic books of the week. This week, our good friend Jerome, also known as Doom Mega, said you need to review 7174 Annual from Image Comics. It was just as bad as your Seed of Grace book last week. We're going to talk about that one. We're also going to talk about Star Trek Discovery Adventures in the 32nd Century. And here with me, as always, is the Marvel aficionado, the X-Men historian. Doc, how you doing, buddy?
Can we stop reviewing trade paperbacks for like...
Well, that was I didn't realize it was going to be 88 pages. This was kind of a weird thing. We're not going to be like the erotic comic book review guys.
Yeah.
So this is definitely not my niche. I grew up with Skinamax and porn on the internet. I do not need that stuff in my comic books. It literally interests me less than you can possibly imagine. I don't find any of it titillating or even interesting. I find it pretty much kind of a turnoff. That is not what makes this comic book completely terrible. This is 7174 Annual from Image Comics, written and illustrated by Ashley Wood with apparently help from T.P. Lewis. Apparently these are a bunch of short stories that they put together that have been released the first time it's ever been released, I guess, in a collection. I do not like modern art, Doc. Art used to celebrate the wonders of the world, the beauty that you could find in the world, things that were greater than ourselves and things of that nature. And I really like old ancient art, even some of the stuff, going back to some earlier American history. But modern art, I think, is absolutely gratuitous. It is there only to celebrate itself and the artists themselves rather than the world that they're living in and making a statement about that. And that is pretty much what this comic book is. It is completely self-indulgent drivel. It's the best way I could describe it.
I'm familiar with Ashley Wood's work, but there's a reason why the only time I enjoy his work is whenever it's paired with Joe Casey writing. It's a sketchbook with some random words, tossed salad of words thrown on top. Ashley Wood is an impressionist, sort of, but his writing is complete trash.
I could read a comic book with this art, with a good story behind it, and it would be perfectly fine because the art is suitable. It's just, you're right, the words and the story that it's actually telling that are the downfall of 7174.
It's nonsensical pseudo poetry slapped over some very typical Ashley Wood art. If you have a competent writer writing over this to probably keep it in line, it's not too bad. Essentially, this book starts as a copyright avoidance Astro Boy story. He wanted to avoid getting, copyright slapped or trademark slapped, so he did Astro Lad. But it's just an Astro Boy story. And hey, look, it's not really my cup of tea. I'm not a huge manga guy, but then it just deviates off into pretentious musings masquerading as depth.
Yeah, there's plenty of that. And that the Astro Boy comic, and really the first maybe quarter of this entire comic book, maybe a little bit more than that, is just like, we've lost our muse. Without muse, there's no purpose in life. And of course, only an artist would think that they're the most important person in the world. And without art, there would be no life. And so it's like, listen, buddy, I get it. You're an artist. You probably aren't appreciated as much as you should be for what limited contributions you do provide to society, but you are not essential. I like art because I can look back and it says something about the time people are living in and the culture around it itself. And that could be very useful and very enlightening to whoever's receiving the art or reading the book or whatever like that. But this dude thinks like the art is the only thing that's ever gotten us through. And like the first quarter of it, it's just meandering garbage. It's nothing to it, and it only gets worse.
Ashley tried to take a bunch of these little sub pin-ups, some short stories, and try to and he accomplished it for probably the first half of it, like trying to loosely connect them through a theme, like a recurring theme, and maybe that there's a connection between them. But by about the second half of this book, all pretense of there being any fucking connection, they couldn't even keep the muse theme throughout the entire book because there's a bunch of them that had nothing to do with that. All it was let's make women, I guess the giant naked space chicks in bondage were supposed to be the gift that gives life, for they are the spirit of the muse.
Fans of the channel will know I'm likely the world's biggest fan of comic book camel toe, but this actually goes over the line. It was just gratuitous and stupid. Then at the end, you got the one muse that's remaining and things are shoved up her ass, and it is just like, okay,
yeah,
I'm glad this is over. Slog is the wrong word for it, because I think a slog comic is more enjoyable than this. It's just once you're like 5 pages into it, you realize what this writer is about and what this comic book is going to be about. I hate pretentious dillweeds like this dude. I don't know Ashley Wood at all, but I can tell you he's one pretentious, self-indulgent comic book writer who thinks that artists are far more valuable to this world than they really are. It's not as bad as Rockstar and Softboy.
Yeah, Rockstar and Softboy was offensive in just being awful. This is something that's offensive by just the lack of depth that was so evident and how self-indulgent this was.
It's wrapped in the cloak of being deep, but once you actually look into it, you're like, oh, it's really just the artists celebrating themselves, and I can't imagine any type of art being more shallow than that. Those are my thoughts on 7174. Thank you once again to Jerome Jew Mega for recommending us or asking us to do this one on Worst of the Week. We're not going to do that again. If you want us to do Worst of the Week, bring us some superhero comics, because I'm not doing art house bullshit anymore. I ain't doing no more nudie comics. I'm tired of eroticism. I've had my fill for 2022. Put that one out there, but thank you very much, Jerome. Let's get into something not quite as bad, but certainly not good. Star Trek Discovery, Adventures in the 32nd Century from IDW. This is written by Kirsten Beyer, Mike Johnson, with art from Angel Hernandez. We've certainly seen Angel Hernandez at this big two. The art is probably the only saving grace of this comic book. Although I can see how it could be off-putting to some people, this is clearly experimenting with digital comic art. I heard someone describe it as photorealistic. I think you are fucking way off on this being photorealistic. It's different.
It's let's just trace scenes from probably a TV show, then draw on top of them. Honestly, I would have preferred if it was just a bunch of still images from the fucking TV show without anybody drawing. I did like the
coloring
anything.
And the way that they did the coloring. I thought it made the pages pop better than a lot of modern comic books.
Yes.
Which I thought made it more vibrant and more fun to look at.
Yeah, it was there was a lot more contrast in it. It didn't look muddy the way that a lot of modern comic book coloring does. It wasn't terrible. Like, the art did not offend me in this. What I hated about this is Cat Lady comics for cat ladies, made by cat ladies.
This is Star Trek Discovery, Adventures in the 32nd Century, #1. This is your best foot forward. This is setting the tone for what these stories are going to be, and it's completely unimportant. It's retelling some interactions between Michael Burnham, who is the most hated new character in Star Trek history, and this cat Grudge's master from the cat's perspective. That would be funny for maybe an annual or maybe an issue #8 or something, where you found your groove and you needed a palate cleanser or a little filler because you had a really dramatic comic story that happened. But as your #1 issue and putting your best foot forward, I can't imagine doing anything more destructive to the comic series and turning off more people. And the only good thing about this comic book, really, Doc, is that the cat hates Michael Burnham as much as the viewers do.
Look, I'm not a Star Trek Discovery person. I haven't watched any fucking Star Trek in, well, almost all of my life. I've watched some of the movies and that's it. So, I mean, I guess maybe the characters hate it. I don't know. He just looks like some random dude.
Take my word for it. Michael Burnham, the chick, is the most hated Star Trek character ever.
I thought Michael Burnham was the dude. Oh.
No. Ooh. The owner is the dude. Michael Burnham is the lady that's with him.
Watching this random cat decide that, I guess the cat hates pretty much everybody. So that's fine. No, you did an issue 1 from the perspective of a cat.
This is a Star Trek Discovery comic book. Why are you making this to begin with? This is literally the lowest viewed, least liked Star Trek show in history, as far as I know. I believe it is the lowest viewed CBS show. It used to be on Paramount Plus. I believe it's actually on CBS The Channel now. It's their least watched show every single week, and they're making this comic book about it, and they're not celebrating one of the characters or anything. They're going to this cat named Grudge.
If it's aiming for quirky or cute, it missed by a mile. Honestly, did somebody just try to make Garfield in fucking space? Because that's what it felt like. It felt like somebody was like, hey, you know what would be cool? Let's do a Garfield comic in Star Trek land. What the?
I like Garfield, so I'm a little offended that you would besmirch his name like that. There's some great creators behind Garfield. I think the artist is fine. I think Angel Hernandez would be perfectly suited on a Green Lantern comic book or whatever. But If you're gonna do a Star Trek Discovery comic from the perspective of a cat, it has to be issue number 1. You would think they would bring it harder than this. This is the first issue. You imagine they had the most time for production to make sure they got all the jokes right, to make sure that it flowed well. And it's just a bunch of random stuff and him walking in a room to like, what are you doing here? You're a cat.
They couldn't have beaten it into the ground further. We got that every single page of this comic. Cats think they rule the universe.
Certainly isn't going to bring anybody to the dance for Star Trek Discovery. Not like everyone's going to, but I don't think many people will be returning from this because it felt like such an enormous waste of time. I imagine if you go to Kirsten Byers' Twitter or social media, you're going to see her with more than a dozen cats. Apparently she is a cat lady. What an enormous waste of time. Resources went into this comic book. There were editors, artists, writers. There was a comic press that had to actually physically print these damn things. You had to use energy to produce the files and store them. We're wasting storage space on this thing. And it literally brings nothing of substance to it whatsoever. It is an enormous waste of time, which I think is a big issue just with comic books in general. So nothing as bad as Rockstar and Softboy from last week, but 7174 is certainly terrible in its own right. And Star Trek Discovery is even worse than that, in that it's completely forgettable. And in 3 weeks, nobody will remember that the comic book came out. It'll be in dollar bins, and nobody will pick it up there either, because there's no hook or no reason for anyone to go back and discover it.
Well, I think we finally hit peak Cat Lady Comics.
Not too long ago, my good friend Perch from the Comics by Perch YouTube channel and I had this conversation about how now is the time for independent comic creators to step up to the plate and really make their presence felt. DC and Marvel in a horrible state following the pandemic, shutdown coming out. They haven't really recovered since. Obviously, these creators haven't done it, but the opportunity is there if they want to take it. Definitely check out this video about what's going on in comic books.